This is update for April 4th, 2023, day 405 of the war and of the date update. This is also catch-up update for April 3. As always, I'm going to discuss strategic events and problems, and then I'm going to switch to the situation on the front line in Ukraine. Today is going to be Asia-heavy day, so I'm actually going to pull the map of Asia to make it easier for us to have discussion. So first sort of news is that China has changed its position on Kurila Islands. These islands here that were annexed by Soviet Union as a result of World War II. There is no peace agreement up to this moment between Japan and Russia. Basically, Japan is demanding those islands back. I think there are like 4 islands or something like that. And so what China is saying now, before they were sort of supportive of Japan, that it was Japanese islands. Now they changed, they're saying, well, we don't know whose the islands are this, basically, which means like they're neutral, but really that really means support of Russia in this dispute effectively. So again, as you can see, the sort of all countries within the alliance are more and more aligned, and the same is true in opposing alliance. If you remember, Japanese Prime Minister visited Ukraine when Chinese President was visiting Russia. So there is very clear, I would say, tension there internally in Asia. Then other news is French president and head of European Commission are going to go together to China, obviously to meet Chinese president to discuss all of this developing situation. They're going to visit on April 5-7. I don't think there's going to be any changes in the Chinese course or Russia's or Iran's and in other countries that silently support them. This is, in a way, sort of objective reality where their desires and needs are on a collision course with the West, and talking is not going to solve any problems in this case. Also, China is doing very active, and it's probably coordinated activity in terms of trying to remove US dollar from as a payment currency. So, it's not going to be able to remove US dollar as the sort of savings currency, which is the most important role of the currency is, savings or accumulating capital, right? That's the most important. And whichever currency has that, that's a really called world reserve currency. And that's why US dollar is still world reserve currency, because around the world, most wealthy people, they store their money in the US dollar, so euros, but basically it's not in Chinese yuan. And that is, from that perspective, the dominance of US dollar is not going to get threatened. It's still going to stay world reserve currency. But what China is trying to do, they're trying to do sort of they're making sort of smaller steps to undermine US position. And what they want to do is to replace US currency as a means of exchange. What this does and how it helps is it prevents US ability to track transactions and understand what's going on, because essentially whenever you use whatever currency, let's say European or Russian or yuan currency, you especially if it's obviously non-cash payments, in all of these cases, you like all of the transaction immediately visible to the central bank of the issuing currency, and therefore it's also being used for intelligence community. So it's effectively like tool to do to collect intelligence on everyone essentially. And so China trying to displace US dollar as that. And also what they're trying to do is that also will prevent disruption in the trade. So let's say in case there is a war, all the transactions are done either in the currency of the partner or Chinese currency. So there is no ability for the US or Europe to disrupt those trade transactions. So this is sort of like smaller goals. So because there's a lot of speculation in the West that China is replacing US dollar, not in the way all these people are saying. It's not replacing as reserve currency, as the means of accumulating capital, what China is doing, and replacing US dollar as a means of payment. It's just one of the functions of the money, even though it's not truly money, but let's say it's one of the functions of the currency. But the main function is accumulation of capital, and that's what really defines money, really. So just to kind of like, since I sort of explained this big picture, what's happening, and just going to give you small examples of what's happening, and it's extremely coordinated, as you will see. So first, there was also China, Brazil. They switching to trade in yuan. Then now ASEAN, which is countries in Southeast Asia. So it really means Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Vietnam, Thailand, Myanmar, Cambodia, Laos. All of these countries. The meeting of their central banks is. They basically have a meeting of central banks and finance ministers and discussing switching their trade transactions to either their own currencies or Chinese, essentially. So again, this basically allows China to control this whole big block. And then what China does to even more sort of put even stronger hold, they trying to create Asian monetary fund. So it's International Monetary Fund is essentially controlled by US, right? So and that's a tool for economic policy or financial policy around the world for the US. So now China wants to sort of replace it and remove influence of their IMF and replace it with Asian Monetary Fund that will be obviously run by China. And essentially what they're going to be doing, they will be giving loans to the countries in Asia, which that's what they are being doing quite a bit over past probably 15 years plus, since let's say mid 2000s. That's when they started doing it as a way to gain influence over the policies in those countries. So essentially, they want to do it in much more sort of strong-handed way in Asia first, obviously, because it's easier, it's closer culturally, it's easier, and that's the primary focus at this moment of China. So we'll see if that's going to happen or not. But this is, they're trying. Let's put it this way. And this actually Asian Monetary Fund is actually step not only in replacing US dollar as a means of payment, but this is sort of weak attempt to actually replace US dollar as the mean of savings. But it's still not reaching where, it's not strong enough, but basically that's sort of second step after just simply switching trade transactions to the Chinese currency or whatever currency of those, of each country. There's also a more open discussion, direct discussion between Malaysia and China of switching their trade to basically both currencies of both countries. Then the same is happening within Malaysia and India. They're also trying to switch directly. So as you can see, this is not just driven by China. There is strong support among many countries in the Asia. Probably there will be support in Latin America and probably in Africa. So essentially, what China is trying to do as a sort of strategic goal is to isolate West and basically isolate it from especially resources, because China fully understands that if West deprived of the resources, especially Europe, it won't be able to do sort of much. So that's essentially the like long-term ultimate goal. Um, Now let's oh, and then one more thing about China, which is very interesting. China sent invitation to Australian Prime Minister to visit China in September October timeframe. The way it's done, it looks like it's almost like a requirement, not like a invitation, but it's more like okay, you have to come here and visit us. So looks very assertive and aggressive, I would say, and as you can see. Now let's switch actually to Russia. First is Russian president announced that there will be BRICS summit in Russia in 2024. That really means it's Brazil, India, China, South Africa. South Africa, it can be at this point the country is so poorly managed, or let's say totally mismanaged, that it's just, I would say, complete write-off. So they are not far away from Zimbabwe at this point relative to where they used to be. So you can, they essentially the significance of that country is has diminished tremendously and will diminish even further. So there won't be any any economic power there. Nevertheless, India, China, Brazil are still there, and that's definitely a lot of economic power, plus the population-wise, it's a big power. Then let's switch to the Russian grain exports. They completely stuck. There's no Russian grain export at this point. If you remember, there's a grain deal. So Russia complains that this grain deal is so one-sided, and just Ukraine is able to export its grain, which true, it is totally one-sided. But the bigger question is like, why did Russia sign this such a one-sided deal, and then loudly complains? And the answer, as I said before, is because Turkey wants the Ukrainian grain, and then obviously for political reasons they cannot allow Russian grain out, but they basically hold Russia hostage because all of the imports, not all of them, but significant portion of imports from Europe, and then in sort of like this sanction avoidance, it's happening through Turkey. So if Turkey stops that, it really will suffocate Russia in extremely painful way. So Russia has to sort of to accept what Turkey demands, and they have zero leverage basically against Turkey. Even the terms are, would say, obviously unacceptable for Russia, but they cannot do much about it. As a result of this, what we're seeing is that this international grain traders, they leaving Russia. So remember, I said, I think Cargill left like about a week ago. Then Louis Dreyfus is leaving as well, and then ADM left. So essentially, all the largest one, and then I think there's one more. I think Viterra, I believe, if I'm correct. So essentially, all the major ones have left because they not seeing sort of resolution to this problem anytime soon. So there is no business for them, and so that's why they're leaving. Now a little bit more about the Russian, well, not so much economy, but the Russian state finances. I mentioned this before many times that essentially that Russian economy is wiped out starting from about May of last year, and it will eventually will hit Russian state finances, which is started hitting sometime, I think, like in October of last year, really in hard way, and the problems are really accelerating and pretty quick. So I mentioned before that the deficit of the Russian state budget was 2.6 trillion Russian rubles for January, February of 2023. So there's new data for March as well. So the cumulative is 4 trillion for just 3 months. the deficit of basically what this really means is that expenses exceed revenues by 4 trillion in simple way. Just in terms of the trend, as you can see, the trend is getting worse because 2.6 for 2 months is, and you have addition of 1.4 trillion for just March. And if you divide 2.6 by 2, it will be like 1.3. So you see the problem is definitely accelerating, going in the wrong direction. And in terms of like total numbers of magnitude, so Russia was expecting to collect in revenues 26 trillion for the entire year, and the entire sort of deficit for the entire year is supposed to be just 3 trillion. So only in 3 months it's already exceeded its 4 trillion, right, by 1 trillion. So things are really, I would say, horrific. And if you do run rate for the entire year, that really means that the shortfall of revenue is 16 trillion. So let's say planned revenue is 26 trillion. So really minus 16, what's going to be collected is essentially 10 trillion, right? So and expenses are 29 trillion. So this really means that Russian budget will collect only 40% of planned sort of revenues, which means that this is going to be basically a disaster for the Russian state budget. They will be forced to sell their reserves. They may be they may survive this for another quarter or 6 months, but towards the end of the year, the situation is going to be extremely dire, and there will be no there won't be any cushion left to smooth the blow in Russia. And then the reason this is happening is because Russian economy is wiped out, essentially severely, severely damaged. And most important damage is actually really coming from all of this industrial production that basically terribly affected by the withdrawal of their European and US and basically Western companies from Russia. And that's why all of these GDP numbers of drop of GDP for Russia for 2022 showing I don't remember 2-3% is completely bogus and doesn't reflect reality what it is. Because if your GDP is down 2-3%, you will not have drop in your state revenues of 60%. So you only have 40% of what you're supposed to have. So it doesn't happen with a 2% drop, basically. Also, Russian currency reflecting this, dire situation that's worsening by day. And a couple days ago it was 78 Russian rubles per US dollar. Now it's already 79. So it's quickly sort of, and let's say in the summer it was like around 60, 65. So and it was pretty stable for the most of the fall. It's really started moving end of the fall and December. So you see it's gaining momentum. This whole problem, this whole kind of implosion of the Russian sort of economy, finances, and everything is definitely gaining momentum. Now let's switch to actually Ukraine. So before I jump into the walk through the front line, I just want to say that Ukraine is also obviously in terrible shape. It's just not to sort of bash Russia. Ukrainian economy is essentially wiped out. I would just also want to mention about another interesting sort of military strategic observation is that Ukrainian army started to let's say experience shortages of lower level commanders. Or officers, probably better way to say it. So that really means company commanders, squad commanders, all of that, everything that's below the battalion level. There's literally acute shortages. There's not enough people with the right education. So what's really happening is there, not the soldiers, but I don't know, it's like surgeons and higher, sort of higher ranking soldiers basically getting promoted into the officers without any education. So this is obviously tells you that Ukrainian army is experiencing extreme stress and shortages of obviously people and skilled people. Um, this is again going back to all of the what I've been saying from the very beginning. Ukraine cannot win this war as a fighting war of attrition, and basically losing so many people, basically exchanging one-to-one with Russia, leads Ukraine to effectively defeat sooner or later. And that's where really the problem for Ukraine is. It needs to switch to from quantity to quality, and current Ukrainian political top and military top are impediment to that switch to becoming more efficient. And so this is eventually this is also will lead to some bad resolution for Ukraine. But for now, it's still basically all of this, more skilled soldiers essentially being, appointed as low-ranking officers at this point. Now let's walk through the front line. In a clockwise fashion, starting from very north and then going down south. So the situation along the state border remains more or less the same. Exchange of artillery fire. Nothing sort of extraordinary at this point there. Now let's jump to North Lugansk front line. Things here are fairly quieted down, let's put this way. The Russian side still tries to attack here in this forest without really moving much or much to show for all of that. But as a whole, the activity here is becoming kind of like a stalemate without really much, and apparently both sides are getting exhausted here. Now let's move to North Donbass front line. This is where Ukraine was sort of suffering mightily, as mentioned before. A couple days ago, Russian side was managed to gain control of the core of the town and slowly squeezing Ukrainian troops on the western outskirts of Bahmut. Nothing sort of, earth-shattering in terms of Russian success here. This is actually, if you really analyze this is really failure, because initial plan, if we look at this is, I didn't even update, but basically the front line is going at this point somewhere along this railroad. So if we look at the big picture of what's happening, the Russian sort of aspiration was to really create the pocket here, right, by moving from the north and south and closing it, and creating pretty decisive defeat for Ukrainian army. They dropped that just because they are exhausted. They lost too many soldiers, and so they don't have anymore that sort of penetrational capability on the entire front line. So they essentially shrink the front line to really kind of like gets to sort of almost very short one, just to squeeze out of Bahmut to make sort of like PR victory. That's not really a victory, but essentially it's I would say strategically it's a defeat, because Russian troops are not able to achieve what they really wanted, which means encirclement and decisive defeat of Ukrainian side, and they are forced to squeeze Ukrainian troops in suicidal street fighting, where the attacking forces are losing at this point much more, because it's in a street fighting. It's definitely the defender has significant advantage. And that really means that attrition on the Russian side is even higher, so the losses are even higher. So it's in a way like Pyrrhic victory that essentially leads to nowhere. But for sort of PR, as I said, purposes, they need they need to show, okay, we captured Bahmut, and in a hope that that will sort of shaken sort of West and resolve the West to support Ukraine, because they will be viewed as inability of Ukrainian military and political top to really use resources efficiently and effectively, which is actually true. But in this case, is actually it just happens that Ukrainian soldiers, like actually soldiers in the trenches, saved this situation with their lives by actually plugging the holes with their own lives, and this is this is how this front line managed to hold on. And so effectively, this probably will also, I would say, fizzle out once the Russian side, squeezes Ukrainian forces out of Bahmut, so they can clearly say, "Oh, well, entire Bahmut is in our hands." Then effectively, this probably will turn into quiet front line, because as you can see, they really not even attacking anywhere on the flanks, just simply because they don't have resources, not because they don't want to, but there is simply no resources. And the option for the Russian side is, have another mobilization, and that's what they're trying to avoid, because it's politically, apparently, in Russia extremely unpopular, and the Russian political top senses that, and they also between a rock and a hard place, because they need to continue this, this whole situation may crumble if, let's say, Ukrainian side is somewhat effective in their offensive. Then really somewhere the front line can really crumble, and they really need to have more resources, more soldiers on the front line, because there's obviously significant losses in all of these attacks. Ukraine, and as I said, Ukrainian side has also lost, I would say, quality in terms of its soldiers. It's becoming like of lower quality, and this, but this is, to be fair, is a normal progression of any war. Your infantry, your just the general quality of yours, all of the sort of military personnel goes down the longer the war goes on. The worse the quality of your military personnel over time. So this is also happening on the Russian side, but on Ukrainian, it's just more apparent, more clear. At the same time, there is not lack of motivation on the Ukrainian side. It's still pretty strong resolve and motivation. It's just the quality is definitely going down. Now let's quickly look at central Donbass front line. So this is, again, also you can see that the Russian attacks here also feel very exhausted, and sort of like kind of like last hurrah, last pushes, and that honestly don't go anywhere at this point. Initial Russian success north of Avdiivka kind of like fizzled out as well. They essentially stuck at this point. So it also feels that they are exhausted here as well. This is where it stands with Avdiivka, and essentially Russian troops didn't manage to gain anything since at least March 24th, as you can see. This was initial the sort of the highest point of success, which was on March 22, when they managed to get across this railroad and capture part of this village Stepove. So now let's talk about the Zaporizhya front line. It's quiet here. Russian side is reporting that Ukrainian military is accumulating troops here, and I would say that if Ukraine is doing any offensive, the highest opportunity is obviously here on the Zaporizhya front line. And obviously the attack is very straightforward, is sort of run to Azov Sea. And then, let's say, even better one would be, run to Azov Sea, destruction of the Crimean Bridge, which is partially repaired. Just for those who missed it, it was blown up by Ukrainian side, or severely damaged, let's put this way. It wasn't blown up, probably over exaggeration. So it was severely damaged, specifically railroad and the regular road. Regular road has already been repaired, I think like a month ago, or maybe even more. Cars and trucks are now using it actively, but the railroad is still being repaired. Looks like it's going to be done within sometime in April, maybe early May. So it will be fully functioning sometime early May. But so the whole idea would be is actually the most sort of, I would say, intelligent idea is to run to Azov, and then obviously use rockets to destroy the Crimean bridge, cut it from there, and then move along the Azov shore, and then separate Russian forces, basically cut them into two pieces, separate like one that's here in um, this area of Kherson and Zaporizhya regions from Crimea, essentially, because there is a very short, very narrow, uh, basically crossing between Crimea and the rest of the Ukraine. So effectively, you will be able to essentially destroy all of the troops here, which will be significant blow for Russia, and also in Crimea. So effectively, you will win Crimea by in that way. You just need to sort of wait out a little bit before the apple will fall in your hands. But at that point, the apple will be cut off from the tree, and it's just a question of time before it just falls in your hands. So this would be really devastating blow for the Russian side. Probably more so politically, can lead to some, as I said, 1917 moment in Russia. Can also lead to use of tactical nuclear weapons by Russia if by Russian political top, if they see this tremendous defeat, which essentially will turn into uh, probably some kind of civil war in Russia. So again, this is the where the highest opportunity for Ukraine. At the same time, there's tons of risks here. But if I were to bet, this is probably what's most likely scenario for Ukraine, because North Lugansk is essentially there's not no strategic sort of win here. Here, there's high concentration of Russian troops in the central bus and northern bus, and it's all also urban, quite a bit of urban. So it's just going to be really hard to achieve anything there. But here, it's more or less open fields, fairly flat. If Russian Air Force is suppressed or kind of kept out of the scene, Ukrainian forces have pretty decent chance at succeeding there. That's it for today. Thanks for watching. Until next time. Bye bye.